I will go ahead and get started. I am Alex. I'm the Programs and Digital Experience Manager for NC Tech. NC Tech is the unifying voice for the tech sector in North Carolina. And if you have any questions about what we do or would like more information about what NC Tech does, feel free to go to nctech.org and check out all the things we do. We'd like to thank ScalePoynt for sponsoring this virtual workshop today. It's Security for Startups Solved with Steve Henry and Sheldon Brow. Couple of housekeeping items. We are going to send a follow-up email after this webinar concludes with information about some upcoming events, the recording of this webinar, and also the survey link that Steve will talk more about in his presentation. And then if you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to drop them in the Q&A box down below, and then we'll save time at the end for some questions. So without further ado, I'll hand it off to Steve.
Hi, folks. Welcome this morning, and thank you for joining us here. We're gonna dive in right here. You can see the agenda that we have along the left. Really, the biggest thing that we want to do for today is we're talking about security, and like the way we like to tell our stories is rather than just come up and chat about something for a while, like let's talk security for an hour. We want to talk to you more hear it from another founder. So we'll let Sheldon give a quick introduction for himself in a minute here as well too. But there's three main goals that we want you to get out of today, particularly if you're a startup that's working in the B2B space. So security is going to be important to you. So one of them is, I like to say, how and when. So when do you do security? How do you do this? Because most of the time it's a very this is a vacuous thing. What do I do? How do I need to get it done? So we want you to have confidence coming out of this. You can understand and visualize it. Second piece here, understand some of the benefits from it. Sheldon's going to talk more about that, how he's experienced it. So I want you to hear it from his side, but there's more you get out of this than just a checkbox if you do it right. And third biggest thing from this, hear it from someone else. I can give you high levels for what that looks like and structure for it. I think the parts that'll be most interesting is hearing it from someone that's actually been doing this. One quick note that we do have for this is we're going to send you a survey out after this. It's a quick 3-minute survey. One, we want to hear your feedback. Do you like this format? We like to do a lot of our founder stories like this. You can hear from people that are doing it as well too and understand the experience. But we're also going to do is, as you'll understand from this, there's 4 phases that we do for rolling out security. So we're going to pick 3 winners, and we're actually going to do a free phase 1 rollout for them. So that's 1 month. We come in, we actually get you set up and going, get you a roadmap, see what it looks like. And then you're able to come and be like Sheldon and kind of tell the story to other people later on, to investors, VCs, other people in the community. So if you're interested in this, we're going to send this out after, and you get to kick off for free. So really quickly diving into this here, quickly introduce myself. My name's Steve Henry. I run ScalePoynt, and what we do is we find promising startups. We take them from mid-stage to the finish line. So our focus is really entirely around AWS and security. And we layer that in with executives that can help run it, and we focus on M&A as we're driving it forward. Mr. Sheldon, sir.
So yeah, thank you so much for having me, Steve. My name is Sheldon Brow. I'm a fisherman's son turned banker and into finance and fintech eventually, and CEO of Pocket Finance. We are crafting a truly client-centric platform, and we want to become the most trusted place for financial advice and collaboration. And I was originally recommended to Steve and ScalePoynt by another startup that had a fantastic experience with them and taken advantage of their expertise over the last 6 months. So happy to be here and talk a bit about cybersecurity and share out what those other founders kind of, realized might be the perception that they should have around it.
Awesome. Okay, so let's dive in. I will say we don't really have a scripted version of this, so let's kind of see how it goes. I want to mostly just ask questions along the way, and Sheldon can kind of riff on these. So first one I'll dive with, there's kind of 5 main parts we're going to talk about today, just for everyone. Why are you doing this, right? What does the structure of it look like when you kick off? How do you run this through playbooks versus doing it yourself? SOC 2, how does that fit in? Do you do it or not? What does the security roadmap look like? So you actually know what's happening. When do I finish? When am I done? What do I need to do when? We're going to ask Sheldon a couple things, just open-ended at the end from his experience. And then any questions you guys have, we'll take those at the end. So again, feel free to throw those in the chat. So first question, number one, I like to ask this from a very like tangible standpoint. Like at the end of the day, like why do you start investing in security? Like what's the real driver that's making you guys actually do this and allocate your resources and time to it?
Well, the first reason you start even thinking about it before you even really, choose a bulk of resources of people and money to throw towards it, the obvious one that's always on your mind is regulatory compliance. Let me not get sued. Let us not get in trouble. Like get a big fine or look like, we need to have to stop everything to have those conversations, mitigating those risks associated with non-compliance. But obviously customer data is one that, you want to be able to overpromise and overdeliver on security and give that sense of confidence anytime people ask you, even though a lot of the times they won't understand that some of the jargon that you want to use. So you want to simplify that language. I think that some of the ones that we won't necessarily be as obvious to us is thinking about that competitive advantage and thinking about how am I going to look in a room. These big institutions are hungry. They're having a lot of conversations. It feels like a lot of noise. It feels like a crowded space for them. They're constantly being solicited. So being able to start out in those bigger conversations with a competitive advantage of showing that you're security first, showing that you have a level of maturity, showing that you have that long-term kind of viability that they'll be able to invest their resources in, any of those strategic partnerships and business relationships. But the number one reason ultimately that it all comes back to for us and that it always comes back to for investors, I guess as well, would be sales, sales, sales. I mean, that's what everybody wants, right? That's what we want to get is sales. Revenue is what's going to get us any attention. It's what's going to get us to the ability to get to the next level, to scale. Imagine showing someone, Steve, a beautiful boat for sale and I'll take the fisherman's angle with all the bells and whistles and features. But what is the buyer really wondering ultimately when you sell them a boat? It's not necessarily how fast it can go or how the fish chart looks. You can see the detail. It's will it float and will it keep me from getting in trouble? So really sales is I think the epitome of what it's become based around. It's the most important thing for sales. And not only can it block sales, but it can really drive sales forward because the first thing that you're talking about, whether it's with an individual that you're trying to sell to or whether you're in the room with an enterprise, a lot of the time that's the first thing they're asking about.
I like that. I will just add as a little flavor from a consulting lens on this. While we like to suggest it's good to get outside help for this, we also like to say it's be mindful where you're getting your help as well too. They can be your best friend or your worst enemy almost. And the one question I'd always say is when you're evaluating a security vendor to work with, this is the question. If they don't ask the first question, like, why do you need this? Why are you driving that? If they're just like, you should do this, and you should do this audit, and you should do ISO, you should do all those things, walk away. Because it's one of those, if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. You want to do the right amount at the right time for the right reasons. And I'd like how Sheldon's kind of put this. Sales is the real reason you're doing this, right?
Yeah, and I will quickly highlight as well, like intake process has become in general, and it was eye-opening during this security process, but in general, like you really need to monitor intake process. If you're not getting a lot of confidence during the intake process, and this comes in the field that we come from in financial advice. If I just go into somebody's life and start blurting out financial advice to someone, then that's probably not going to go like super well for their finances long term. So being able to really pay attention to the type of intake process that you're getting, not just in cybersecurity, but with any consultant, because it can really be a completely different experience.
Awesome. So, okay, so here's the context for this, because we do want to, I want to focus on Sheldon's stories for this so you can understand what are you going through as a founder and CEO. At the same time, I wanted to put a little structure so you can kind of see how this fits in at the same time. So the way that we roll this out is we look at this in 4 phases, right? You come in, you do an MVP. Guys, let's just get started. Let's get some baseline things going. We've listed them up here. We have separate talks so we can go into the details for it, but just so you have some visual reference. Phase 2, we get more into the documents and cloud infrastructure that you need rolled out. Security ops is phase 3. So that's literally now we're adopting it and using it in the org. Phase 4, you go and get audited for it. So I guess the question I'd really ask for this is, like Sheldon, when you started this, like how did you feel as a startup when you're trying to get started on security? Did you try their options, before we worked together? What did that look like for you in the very beginning where you're like, this is something we have to do?
Well, I felt a little bit overwhelmed by it, and I think I had that kind of rudimentary understanding of, okay, well, I have to check my passwords, and I have to make sure that we have the right encryptions in play and client data, and you don't really have a lot of insight into what's the first step. So there, you in the incubators and the accelerators, and there's different options available to, like, get listen to the webinars, and then you get a sense of, okay, this is, I really need to do something about this, and you're trying to figure out what something is, and there's lots of different softwares out there that'll help you monitor it and do a really great job when you're set up, and even have some cool kind of, like little templates and stuff. But really, without the expertise, you don't actually know where you're at. So if you look at how easy, that simple, the operations team side looks, but I'm willing to bet that there's a lot of early stage companies that throughout the early spectrum that don't have all of those easy operational ones done.
So once you do get this kicked off, and you're working with a partner for this, you have this driving. When you have someone in there that kind of knows what they're doing in that space, like, how does it affect the decision making and confidence that you have in the choices that you're making and driving this forward as an org?
Well, it's totally different because I had the privilege before engaging, ScalePoynt and as experts. I had, a couple employees that I had, an executive assistant that the government had funded for me, and a business analyst. And we got this software that we thought was really going to make it super easy to set up. And again, a great software, but the perception that we had is that we were going to be able to dive in and do this on our own. We put an incredible amount of labor into it, never really having certainty as to what our status was, or if we even had an MVP. But we had stuff, we had something, we had activity on the security side. So having that kind of confusion going into big conversations, you're really just trying to talk around cybersecurity and keep up with the conversation, where when you have an expert, especially with the additional benefits that come with an expert, where you can really garner the language that's going to be authentic, that you don't feel like you're just fluffy, talking about something and trying to represent as the founder, as the CEO, as whoever's having that conversations on the enterprise side. You're able to really put your chest out and go into those conversations in a way that you're like, okay, I'm here, I can represent my company, I can now put myself in front of anyone. It's totally game changing on your psychology and confidence going into those conversations, let alone being able to really check a box of having a status of being at any stage at all that's coherent.
Just for quick context for people that are watching this here, the way that we actually like to think about this, just to help you paint a picture here, is number one, in the phase one, you're going through your top 10. There is a baseline under this called a SIG Lite. It's an industry standard. It's kind of a standard that's not fully standardized, and you have to pay to access it. But it's all the questionnaires that you get are really based on this. So this is kind of just a really quick view of how you can think about security and how we look at it. For background context, and this is actually the results of an assessment we've done on some before as well too, is you go through these 21 different areas and you can see where the gaps are. And so part of this is just what I'm hoping you can take away from this is, number one, half of this is based on what you guys do on the corporate side, right? Process, procedure, security ops. The other half is really based on your platform, which is really largely your cloud infrastructure for it. So the way I like to look at that is the 4 key parts you'll see is the SIG Lite. I like to call it the security Bible. It's about 60 plus pages of just every single thing that you need for it. And this is really nice when auditors come in to look at it. If you want to show it to a customer there, like, you can just show them like, oh, these guys, okay, they have their stuff together. Having an actual rollout plan to go with it. What do you do during each of the phases? What are all the steps for it? There's tons of points to check in on. The cloud security. So this is really heavily, what does your baseline infrastructure look like? So your infra and DevOps cover a lot of that. And then the third part is going to be like your customer facing pieces, right? So having a CISO, someone that can represent security to your customers, being able to manage those questionnaires that come in, so you don't keep looping back and forth. You don't have to wonder, do I need to do this or not? Like, I know they asked it. Can I get around it? Can we explain it in a different way? And then putting something on your website that represents your security, so your sales teams have some assets as well. So I just wanted to cover that for a little bit of background. This is kind of the picture that we like to paint. These are the different areas and categories that are being figured out behind the scenes.
the joys of wondering and exploring what if I need to do this. It's just as important what you don't need to do, what you do need to do.
Did you guys have anything, Sheldon, that you guys dove into early on that you really didn't need to do, that really, it chewed a lot of time up for you guys, or just kind of like ended up being a bit of a waste?
There was an abundance. So there's all of this documentation that you get a list of, from different, whether it's, different resources or research, or even within those different softwares that you can use. And you don't know, okay, well, if you've got 50 documents you can create, which ones are the most important to create first? And then, it's not always necessarily generic. It could be, personalized to your business. So there's a lot of, trying to understand, like I say, what applies to me right now, because the pond, we signed up for cybersecurity insurance way before we had any users. So, there's not just time that can be wasted, but resources where if you're not getting those expertise, I'm not having any users. I just have my brother and my mom testing this. I'm thinking, I got to be paying all this money per month for cybersecurity. Every dollar counts, and you got to be scrappy when you're a founder, and you got to really contemplate every dollar that goes out the door. So getting the right guidance on those things, and not just doing things out of fear or obligation or anything else, it's absolutely critical, and it's going to make an exponential impact on your productivity every week and every month.
Okay, so diving into the next part about this, so the one question we would really ask, and I'll just kind of throw it open-ended to you, Sheldon, there, like, is it worth doing it yourself?
I don't know if you would say in your position if maybe there is a time that it could be, but for me as a founder and in my experience and even the stories I've heard around me, no, I would never consider tackling it myself any more than I would, doing like complex investments and financial advice, when I have like, a lot of, different corporation and trust and all these different things. It takes a lot of labor to sort out what is needed in general, what's specific to your business. Then you've got to find a way to document that, create the infrastructure, be able to present that in an intelligible, coherent way to internal and external stakeholders. And you really want to be able to have confidence and posture. And if you're not an expert in cybersecurity and you're stumbling your way through it and just trying to get stuff done, and sometimes we can just get stuck in a mode where we're trying to get stuff done and we don't exactly know when's the optimized time that we're going to have to focus on that. And it's going to help a lot to roll it out internally. If it's one thing to you're trying to fake it till you make it in external conversations. But if you really want to get true buy-in from your team members, you need to be able to show them that you have access to a level of expertise that's going to engage them, that's going to make sure that they're doing all the things for all of the departments, and even the smallest things. If they don't have a clear vision of what the goal is and why you're doing it, and you have the expertise there, it's going to be a little bit tougher to get these things done internally. So you really need to have the confidence to your team that it's important, and kind of build it from the DNA out. So I would not recommend at all trying to do it on your own. Definitely, do your research and try to get additional intelligence. Listen to things that you can keep up in the conversation beyond the expert that you'll consult. But I would not try to go about it. I would have a conversation with an expert as early as possible, and especially if you're going to find a good one. Because again, there's all kinds of different flavors out there. You really have to interview those consultants that you take on very seriously, because if you don't take on a good one, then they may just be trying to sell you to move forward with a generic process. And again, that comes into interview them about what does your intake process look like. So definitely, have that conversation with someone as early as possible. I would not remotely consider doing another startup and trying to do any of it myself without having that kind of custom conversation first.
Sheldon, you touched on this a bit earlier as well too, but I'll just kind of ask again because it's a little contextual in this one. One of the questions we get asked all the time by people is, there's a number of good tools that are in the market that help in this space. Does buying that tool solve this? Like, does that allow you to do it yourself?
No, and I will say that I don't know if it's the marketing or just your own, I guess, what you want to believe as a founder, but you come to this, oh man, once I get this software set up, I'm going to be cruising, I'm going to be like optimizing security, and it's just going to be so easy. But really, it is an incredible labor to, and again, you just don't have any of that certainty with the status. I did try to do it, and we did get something done, though I still couldn't tell you this day to what extent that we had achieved or what status we had. And I wouldn't say that I could confidently step in a room and even say that we had a cybersecurity MVP. I could tell you that we had some documentation. The documentation that we had was, as good as it could be with having, some level of template, but there's great support in some of these tools, and once you get it set up, but it's only something that can go hand in hand, in my experience, with a true security officer or expert advisor. And those two experiences between trying to do it yourself, even with what sounds like the awesomest software you can imagine, and it is for the things that it does, they're two totally different planets. Having expert advice and then at some point combining them together. So you want to be able to, again, stick out your chest with maturity, to know that you have that discipline, that order within your company, and it makes your whole team have confidence, not just the person that's in the room having the most important conversations.
Well, I will say from the consulting side for this, I wanted to show a couple things on here. Number one, just in terms of order of like how much work is there. Like, I want to throw some numbers out here. We actually took the time to count this with the team. Like, there's 70 pages of SIG-Lite documentation, framed and nuanced very specifically to how enterprise wants to hear it, right? And there is a way that they want to see things. To Sheldon's point, there's a language that needs to be used. There's at least 18 policies and procedures that are put out there. The rollout, we've got 122 tasks to actually roll this out. The cloud infrastructure to baseline rollout of proper like dev, QA, and prod, separation of environments, encryption, key management, all that, VPNs, all that stuff that you need for it, including the CI/CD DevOps, environment promotion, database, like roll forward, roll back, migrations, all those sort of pieces, 75 Terraform modules. That's infrastructure as code. So that's so you can code it and make sure everything works properly. Your average questionnaire from a customer has 130 questions. So I think the big thing to take away from this is, what's interesting for this is there are templates for this, and the templates are really important, right? It's 90% the same for every startup that's in there, but how you roll those out and integrate them into your org and tailor the pieces that are a little bit, specific to, okay, here's how this makes sense to you. Like, that's what we end up calling a playbook. It's expertise plus templates. And really all that we're doing from that side when we recommend these approaches is we're taking from the private equity world, right? PE has playbooks for everything they do. Right? They're pretty like thorough and harsh on how they do it, but they know how to make money and they know how to do things in a structured fashion. And there's a few pieces like this where we should just be able to say, I like using the analogy, we don't go set up our own servers anymore. You click a button, you go to Amazon, they look after that because your real value is your product and customer. I find for SaaS startups, security is the same thing. It's mostly the same, but there is still a lot of manual expertise that goes into it to rolling these out for you so that your org adopts it. That's not something you need to worry about. This is the amount of quantity that work goes in, and all those pieces need to work together at the same time.
Yeah, and there's a big difference between having access to and having the confidence of a template versus a combined experience in a graduated, coherent, clear playbook.
I like that. Okay, one piece I'll just touch on here. We're not going to talk about this one today, because we are going to talk about this a month from now. So we do have another webinar coming up Thursday, October 12th. We're going to talk about the AWS cloud side, just from cloud in general, in terms of like, this is the foundation for your dev team. How does this enable them so that, hey, as soon as they do, they can deploy stuff, they can click, they can promote it, all that sort of stuff. What also dovetails nicely though, and this just, if I want you to help paint this visual picture here, is half of security is how you set up everything internally, you process procedure, half of it is cloud. So if your cloud is done wrong, not only is it not good for, hey, it's going to slow down our dev teams, your security is not going to work either, right? All your documentation's wrong. So it's very easy to have more templated documentation if your infrastructure is built a certain way that aligns with it, right? So the two of them fit together nicely. The one is describing the other. So we'll talk about this more in a month, but I just wanted to give you guys a heads up so you're not missing a part of that picture. Okay, so favorite question that we always get asked for this. So Sheldon, I'll throw this to you, this one. I'll kind of frame it as two parts. Like, when do you start security and when do you need to have a SOC 2 audit done?
When do you think you need to start security? You have all these fanciful things, and sometimes we were rushing towards the audit in a time that probably didn't even necessarily make sense. We're questioning whether we're going to have that capital in order to commit to that. So I'd really say, as soon as you have to. What does that look like? Maybe it looks like, again, when it starts to be roadblocking big enterprise sales or conversations. Ultimately, I'm sold that it's all about just being SOC 2 ready. It's never too early to talk about SOC 2, to start having those conversations, to understand when it's going to be most important for you, and build out that timeline, budget your time, budget your resources. It doesn't mean that you're going to need to get your full audit and pass. It feels like a critical part of any MVP because it creates, like I said, order. It creates a culture that you're now building it from the DNA outwards of the company, and you won't have to then look at, you'll be able to avoid situations where you now have to go then and unwind things and re-put them back together. So the earlier you have it, you're definitely going to save yourself time, because you're going to have the right journey and the right order in play. And being SOC 2 means that you're going to be able to quickly quote a time to completion. If you're not SOC 2 ready, and anybody's that's dealing in tech, that once if you don't have too much clarity around certain projects, especially when it involves operations and tech, the quality of time that you're quoting someone, especially in a sales enterprise conversation of, okay, we'll be at this level to have that level of engagement at this time, it's more guesswork than you want it to be, and you can have more certainty in that time frame when you've had that early conversation, when you are SOC 2 ready, because it's going to be a lot more accurate.
Just in your journey right now, have you had any sales that have been stopped because you did not have a SOC 2 audit done yet?
One of the ones that was very, very early, and it's interesting. So I was in a conversation with a large entity in Canada, and that was something, I guess, that we thought, because of the impression, I guess, that we were kind of sold by the software market. We thought that what we had in that area was going to be sufficient. I quickly realized when I got into my second conversation at the enterprise level with 8 executives that there was going to need to be a leap forward a lot sooner than later, and that my sales conversation was going past where we were prepared to be. Thankfully for me, that company actually had a cybersecurity breach at that time, so they had to disengage, and they had to take 6 months to focus on that, and that actually gave me the time to then go and kind of recalibrate. Let's get in order and be ready in that conversation.
But everyone else you're working with right now, was the audit necessary? You just need to be able to get through security diligence.
So right now, there is conversations that we're in that we do need to be able to show that timeline, which we're able to do now. And some of the conversations that we're in, we just needed to be able to communicate where we're at. They just want to be able to understand that we do have an MVP, that we do have things in order, that we do have things progressing, and being able to show that that roadmap that I know that we're going to talk about as well.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's the biggest advice that we give around this is, number one, if you want to understand the context from the enterprise that you're selling into, the reason they're doing this in the first place, they're asking all these security questions, is they're required to do third-party security diligence on any vendor that they're working with, as you are actually as well too. They're just going to do a more thorough version of it. That's what's driving it. In doing so, they have to assess risk levels. So in future talks, we'll talk more about what are the right things to communicate with them. Like, there's a big difference between we're just sending you some data versus we're going into and we're pulling like detailed personal data, financial records from your organization. So the security people, when you're talking to them, they don't know that affects what they're going to expect out of you. So again, as you're going, these conversations, these nuances become very, very important, and they affect how they're going to look at you guys. What I would say as a rule of thumb is a SOC 2 audit does not get you out of security diligence. Once in a while, they might send you a smaller questionnaire. Maybe they don't send you one, but really you still need to do that security diligence. And what I like that Sheldon described there is start your security quick, have a baseline in there so you can present strongly and be able to respond to these. And most of them that we find is the biggest pushers on this are going to be enterprise. So what we'll find, I've never seen a deal fall through that didn't sound something like, okay, eventually, okay, we've decided you need to be SOC 2. Let's talk about the timeline for that. And usually that timeline is 6 to 12 months. Maybe you'll go through a pilot, that's fine, but the next one you do it, or next year you need to have it. So if you're already ready and you can show confidence to them, we find that generally gets you going well. And so the answer to that we generally recommend is, when do you need to actually do the audit? Is like, well, when they're pushing you and say, cool, by next year you need to have this in, or we can't continue, or you can't go live. Great. We've already been lining things up. We can go do that together next year.
Yeah, and the bigger the conversation, I find the bigger the conversation, the sooner they're bringing in their compliance or their security into the conversation. So again, it doesn't mean that you have to be able to say, I have the audit done. But usually the very beginning of those bigger conversations, especially when the people that are your internal champions that can influence the decision makers are really excited about your product, they are looking during that call to their compliance and security people to kind of get a general sense of, okay, do they at least have any kind of clarity about, what that roadmap looks like for them, so that they can even continue the conversation. Otherwise, they might kind of, end up kind of ghosting you.
So speaking of timelines there, security roadmap. So one of the things that we do like to put together that's really important is we want to give you a bit of a view here. What do the phases look like? What are the types of activities that you're going to have? Partly from an operational side, right? How do we actually get this done? Do we have a real plan? What do we do at the right time when it's done? But the other side is, so you actually can present with your customers as well. So Sheldon, I'll kind of throw this to you a little bit. One of the first things we did with you guys during the MVP phase was put together a security roadmap. What did you guys do with that?
Well, for me, it was a big deal, and maybe I'm corny, but like, the feeling of being able to intelligently represent both internally and externally. It's one thing. There's a level of confidence that you have when you've got the structure, when you've got the order, when you've implemented the things, you've consulted with an expert. But the security roadmap has given me confidence that anytime I want to give clarity to so many different kinds of stakeholders, there's investors, there's grants that we apply for, there's obviously the different sales and all of your internal team. Getting everyone on the team focused with one clear overview, again, helps that buy-in. Before, I was using an Excel spreadsheet that no one would want to look at. I don't know that anyone would be able to make sense of it other than myself and a couple other people that helped create it. And there's that great lack of certainty of what stage are we actually at. And I felt very proud to be able to, anytime anybody would ask me for an update on this type of thing, I'd be able to quickly send it over, highlight where we're at within that roadmap, and then very quickly let them know kind of, what those next stages are going to be for them. So for me, it's been one of my favorite tools, being able to have a nice deliverable like that, that's just so easy to put in front of people and show that level of maturity that you want to be able to feel in those conversations, and the leadership you want to be able to show internally. And it also really helps you budget your time on the operations and tech side as to what each month is going to look like, because you do want to be able to forecast for internally and externally what you're going to be able to manage beyond that. And especially if you're getting a consultant that's coming in and an expert that's coming in and really championing it for you, now you just have to deliver a great message about that roadmap, about the plan, about the things that you're achieving in security, and not just constantly having to worry about the impact on everybody else within the team.
Right. You touched on something interesting there that it was interesting even for me to hear as well. And I don't think it's obvious, but I'll just kind of dig in on this one a little bit. You mentioned the investors as well too. Like, why raising capital is always top of mind. That's the number one thing that's always going on as a founder. How is this helping you with investors?
Well, I think that the investors, have continued to evolve, and that it used to be only a conversation of like, tell me how much revenue you have or how close you are to revenue and revenue. But like, they're starting to catch wind and understand that, in order to really capture those great opportunities, you're going to need to have a certain kind of order. So with the investors, and again, I'll accentuate because it's in that same category of money and funding, with the grants, there's serious money available to you, but you have to be able to present that in a way that not just shows clarity, but in a way that's simple and they can understand it. And that's another great thing that the roadmap did is it uses a level of it sounds technical enough as an overview that it sounds intelligent. It's clear that we know what we're doing, but it's also simple enough language that they're able to consume it and they're able to kind of take a quick peek. So it's been very impactful, I think, for investor conversations, and I've used it several times in the last 2 weeks for those.
Oh, nice. So we're just coming up towards the end here. So by the way, just as we're trailing towards that, if you guys had any questions to ask, do throw them in the chat. And Alex, if you want to throw up the link for the survey after as well too, just so people see that before we get to the end, feel free to throw that in the chat. The last two questions we had for you, Sheldon, was I'll leave these a little open-ended. Like, are there any benefits you got out of this that you didn't expect from rolling out security in your organization?
Well, as a general, because I'm going to answer this in two ways. And as a general of implementing security, just the level of confidence of knowing I can go into any room and pitch anyone I want at any time, that is a game changer. Because, and I love that you even said to me once, Steve, none of us would know what imposter syndrome is if nobody told us. And that is something that can be something that in an early stage startup, you slap this title of founder and CEO on yourself and all of a sudden, but the level of confidence and even a level of almost gravitas that it gives you going in and being able to go into any conversation you want at any level. But specifically with ScalePoynt, because I have had a lot of different engagements with different kinds of consultants with both security and otherwise during my several years as a founder, that impossible feeling that we have as an entrepreneur of delegating, of handing something over to someone else and knowing that they're going to take it right to the finish line and you're not going to have to keep kind of looking over your shoulder to make sure that it's done in the way that you really need it done. So having something completely taken off your hands, completely championed in a way that it felt very effective and without that mental burden, and I bring it back to my financial world. If you're hanging out with your family, your daughter, your grandmother, the people you care about, you want to be able to have 100% focus on them and not have that underlying mental burden of financial stress. In the same way, you want to be able to hand off something to somebody to manage and be able to have that cybersecurity in a way where you're not having that underlying mental burden. I'd say another big one for us was great boardroom advisory on how to enhance those enterprise conversations and how to craft the language that's authentic, that sounds competent, being able to talk to those compliance and security officers and executives and make sure that you're someone that can be seriously discussing it with them, and then improving the engagement with the third parties. We had third parties outside of ScalePoynt doing pen tests for us, and we were able to yield a lot more out of those, make sure that there's kind of a military order to engaging those and make sure we get what we want out of those relationships instead of those moments in time of engaging penetration tests as you're not sure if you're getting exactly what you need out of that.
That was an interesting one as well too, is I almost like to call it wrangling the vendors a little bit. Is our number one goal we had, background from my side, I was a CTO before this as well too, and you're bringing in vendors and you're bringing in other people. I think the biggest thing I always wanted was I want something completely solved. I like using the expression 90% and 0% are the same to me, because I don't know which parts you missed and we still need to look at everything. So me or the team still get, myself or the team still gets dragged into it, and that's not as helpful. And so even for these things, small pieces like, hey, when they're going to do an engagement, okay, if someone's going to do a pen test, are they going to do that? And they're going to do the retest and they're going to give you the final report. And that's all going to be included in the original price. Or we've had some of them, oh, well, we're going to do the first one and then we want the final piece. That's going to be split into a second engagement and we're going to charge you another fee for that. Well,
and we almost had that. We almost had that situation. I remember because you were like, no, we will not be renegotiating. This is what we need to get done. And that was like, okay, yes, exactly.
And just for a quick example on that, because that's a fun this is a real life anecdote here. The problem with this is you want it to be charged for, we're going to do a pen test. We'll give you the results of it. The first results of your pen test, especially if it's the first one you've done, have a whole ton of horrible stuff on it, right? These are criticals, your severes, all these bad pieces that you have here. And if you need to go to a customer, you don't actually send them the full pen test, but if some of them want to spot check you on things, they at least ask for the summary page. And so you go in and saying, hey, look, I've done a pen test and look at all this red all over us. Bad, 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 bad. That doesn't show them you fix. That shows, okay, we've done a pen test, but our platform is terrible. And so being able to pull those together and just say, you need to do this and the retest and all this, and I want to be charged twice. And then go and say, okay, now I'm going to show you when someone asks for the pen test, here's the final result of us all clean. Oh, look, there's no criticals, there's no severes, and there's a couple low and trivials, and we work those through in our standard SLAs internally that we have there. That's a very different optics to give someone, and then it saves you money at the same time.
It's huge. It's huge. And you, good luck going back and trying to have that conversation to get them to do the things that you then realized that you needed to make sure that they did. So having that expertise really guides to make sure those conversations go right the first time. You get done what you need done. That was a huge impact, and it saved a lot of money.
Second question I'll have for you here, Sheldon, just as we're closing this out is, so you're a founder, right? You guys there's things you want to build internally. Obviously, it's important to have your own team as you're growing as well too, right? You want to be able to build that entity as you're growing. How do you find you draw that line between what are the things we do yourself and when do we go and get help?
Well, again, it's having that conversation as early as possible, because it is hard to determine what even to do yourself. And if you get a really good consultant, they will tell you, here's the things that you could go and, get some level of doing yourself if there is something. And here's the thing you shouldn't. I mean, the minute that you take your business seriously, you should be engaging that conversation. Don't devalue your time by trying to do it yourself. There's certain things that it's just, it is really devaluing our time and our resources, and you have to be able to build it from the DNA at the beginning so that it's not something that you have to tear apart and put it back together again.
I like to, just a fun aside, I like to use two kind of rules of thumb for this. One of them is when you're focusing on your product and customer, that's what differentiates you. Those are the things that as much as possible, you want to build that focus in-house, right? That's why people are coming to you instead of your competitors or something else. There's a lot of operating infrastructure that doesn't add any benefit or value. Your customers, other than a checkbox, don't care about security. Right? They're not like, wow, that's why I'm buying from Sheldon and Pocket Finance. When you're looking at like cloud and stuff, that's not why they're going to buy from you guys. They care about the end result, not the foundation it was built on, other than knowing that it was there and they can trust it. And so I kind of like to draw that delineation between, is this baseline infrastructure that's important that I need a good foundation? Or is this something else? It's kind of like, I use the example, if I'm having a house built, I'm sure I can do some decorating inside. Maybe I can even put a roof on if I need to. Not sure that's the best idea, but I'm not going to go pour the concrete at the bottom. Right? That's just not, you get someone to go do that, you get that done, you move on, and that's there forever.
Well, and that's a great analogy too. I mean, because that's really, you're talking about the foundation. Well, the security is the foundation. It's going to be the foundation for your sales. It's going to be the foundation for confidence on everybody on your team. It's going to be the foundation to make sure that your customer data is something that is managed in a way that gives your clients confidence when you're able to extract some of those things from that conversation, from a roadmap, and publish them publicly in a way that people can understand and buy into.
Awesome. So just a quick wrap up here. The two quick plugs I'll throw out there. One of them is we've got a little survey at the end. Give us some feedback if you want. Let us know what you thought about this. And if you are interested, then just check the box. And we are going to do 3 free security phase 1 rolls out. Right. So same thing that we started with Sheldon, we're further on now as well too. We want to show some people and get them started. So you just get that feel. You've got a roadmap. You've got your top 10 done. You know the baseline for this. You have a plan. You know what the rest of it looks like. So that's in the survey right there. If you're interested, go for it. The other one is, with NC Tech, we like these founder stories here. If you guys like them as well, let us know. We have another one coming up next month, Thursday, October 12th. We're going to talk more about AWS Cloud. So those are the next 2 pieces that we have coming up. If you guys have any questions, we'll give a minute right now. You can throw them in the chat, and you've got Sheldon and I right here we're available.
Complete that survey, because this isn't some cute little coupon for a little thing. That even that 1 month of security rollout is a big deal, and it's going to give you a next level of confidence.
So chat's pretty quiet for today. Alex, I'll throw it back to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Sheldon and Steve, for the awesome presentation. As Steve mentioned, we'll be sending that survey link out to everyone that registered. Feel free to fill that out, give any feedback to Steve, and as well as be entered in to win that awesome kind of giveaway. We do have that AWS cloud security webinar coming up on Thursday, October 12th, and I'll also send some information about that in the follow-up. But yeah, thank you for ScalePoynt for sponsoring this webinar, and everyone have a great day.